I think the eyes of the nation and maybe the world are focused on New Jersey to some extent now, because you were really the epicenter to some extent of the COVID-19. You fought it off. You took a lot of tough actions. You did it day after day after day, get those numbers down. Now they're starting to come back. Why?
Good to be with you, David. You're absolutely right. And the toll has been enormous. Over 13,000 confirmed deaths and probably at least a couple more thousand that are suspected also to have passed from COVID-19. That's the awful tragedy. Our numbers have gotten a lot better. And so as they got better, we made the decision based on the facts and the science to begin step-by-step reopening our state. So we knew when we were doing that, doing it responsibly, I hope at every step, that we would take on more risk in terms of increasing the potential for transmission. We were comfortable with that risk. What we were not expecting was the explosion in cases elsewhere in the country. And so the rate of transmission has gotten a little bit uncomfortably high for us, just over 1. Today it improved slightly. And so we put in with New York and Connecticut a travel advisory for folks to self-quarantine if they're coming back into our state from a hotspot. As your colleague noted, and by the way, I welcome her to New Jersey as a resident, we are now requiring face coverings outdoors. Those are 2 steps that we've taken over the past 10 days or so. We've held off on indoor dining, which brings me no joy, but it's quite clear that this virus is a lot more lethal inside than it is outside. And so we're watching this minute to minute, and again, trying to make the decisions at every step based on the facts.
As you say, Governor Murphy, the numbers are still way better than they were at the worst of it, but that transmission number of above R0, I think it's called, is disturbing. If the main problem is people coming from outside the state, either people who live outside the state or New Jerseyans who've been away and come back, do you really have the authority, do you have the power to control that? I understand you can advise them to quarantine. How do you enforce that?
Yeah, you could do a fair amount, but it is the United States of America, and one of the things we can't do constitutionally is to stop people from another state at the border. I never thought I'd say this, David, but I'd love to be able to build a wall around us, either our state or our region. So it's a big amount of appeal to personal responsibility, and New Jerseyans have been extraordinary throughout the entire pandemic of doing the right thing, whether it's staying at home, now asking to wear face coverings, work at home, a whole series of things that we've asked of our fellow citizens, and they've done the right thing. We need that again. We're developing an app which is not ready for prime time yet, but that will come online. Lots of signage at our borders on the highways and airports. We've built up enormous testing capacity, which we didn't have several months ago. And so there's not just self-quarantine if you've come in from a hotspot, but get tested, for crying out loud. We've built the capacity, use it. So we're hoping to get at this a number of different ways. We've had a few instances that we know of already, and the system has worked. We're building out a large community core of contact tracers. They were able, for instance, to track down some folks who have been at a wedding in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Hoboken had a bunch of folks returning from hotspots. So far, it has worked, but it is not a perfect system. And again, we have to appeal to personal responsibility.
Appeal to personal responsibility. To what extent are you prepared to back that up with the specific executive order about the face masks outside if you can't socially distance? Are you prepared to go beyond just advising or even giving out some warnings? Are you prepared to actually fine people?
Absolutely, you have to be. You have to put teeth in this. But part of the reason why we hadn't gone to, we were the first state in America, by the way, to go to mandatory face coverings indoors. Part of the reason we didn't go outdoors until now, number one, the virus is a lot less lethal. That doesn't mean it isn't lethal, but it's a lot less lethal outside. And secondly, to your point, David, it's really hard to enforce. We don't want to put something on the books that we can't put teeth behind. But again, it's up to local law enforcement. We expect folks to do the right thing here. And do we reserve the right to warn them, to summons them, to fine them potentially? Absolutely, we have to.
We have to get through the summer, but then we have the fall coming and school, the issue of school, which is very much on the national agenda, not just in New Jersey, as President Trump has really pushed to reopen the schools. What are your plans at this point? To what extent are you planning on people actually being in the classroom as opposed to remote learning?
So our Department of Education and Department of Health put out standards a couple of weeks ago, very comprehensive, largely defining the parameters and the basic principles and leaving it up to our districts to develop their plan and come back for our common agreement. Our bias is to get kids back into the classroom. That's the starting point, but we have to do it responsibly. I think, David, the toughest nut to crack is going to be preventing the unwitting passing of the virus from an asymptomatic, young, healthy kid to an older educator or administrator or someone with underlying health challenges. So the whole notion of capacity constraints, social distancing, face coverings, lots of hyper hygiene, et cetera, doing things outdoors wherever possible. Those are all going to be elements of what we think it will look like.
There will be some things that no doubt will be statewide. Let me talk about testing. For example, are you considering requiring that every person, every instructor, every member of staff be tested before they go back to school to teach and serve the students come fall?
If we could do it, yes. We have a daily capacity right now in New Jersey that is somewhere 25 to 30,000 tests a day. Absolutely. The only obvious point to make is even if we're able to achieve that, and I think we could achieve it, this is a virus that doesn't just, it's not a one and done. We got that out of the way, check the box, we're good to go. This is an iterative reality that we're living with. And that's the only caution I would say. This is until we have therapeutics that are developed explicitly for COVID-19, certainly until we have a vaccine, we've got to keep coming back to testing and tracing and doing the right things.
All of the things you described that various school districts will do will cost money. Who's going to have to pay for that? Is that left up to the individual school districts? Can the state help the school districts defray some of the costs? Do you have the resources to do that?
Listen, we have the #1 public education system in America. The state puts more money per capita, per child into our school system, I think, than any state in America. But there's no state that has enough money to do what we're going to need to do, not just in education, but across the board. So we need, and I would say desperately, not just blue states, not just in the states that have big legacy challenges in terms of structural deficits, but states across the country are in desperate need for direct federal cash assistance. The federal government plays an existential role that no other actor can play. And this is one of those instances where we need Congress to pass a big bill with a big amount of direct cash assistance and the president to sign it. That will help, among other things, among many other things, including helping small businesses, to pick another example. That will give us the resources that we'll need.
Give us a sense of, you said you're desperate, give us a sense of that desperation, because I understood that, in fact, your budget is balanced through September 30. That sounds like you've got a little time to work with it. Yeah,
it's balanced because it's constitutional. It's a constitutional requirement. But in order to get our budget balanced literally only for 3+ months, David, we had to cut or defer $5.2 billion of expenses. The nut for New Jersey, we have estimated between mid this year and the end of 2021 is $20 billion. That's the amount of, that's how overwhelming this crisis has been, both in expenses that have exploded and revenues that have fallen off the table.
Are you going to have to borrow money? And if so, what does your access look like to the municipal bond market at this point? New Jersey has not always had the best credit.
Yeah, we will have to borrow money. This is not either or, it's and both. And we'll probably have to put some revenue raisers on the table as well as we develop our next budget. The first place we'll go is the Federal Reserve special program that they've set up. And that'll be the first port of call. And we'll go from there. But this is going to be and both. Borrowing, I'm sure, in the billions and needing federal cash assistance. And again, we're not alone. This is an American challenge right now. And sadly, we're seeing this virus explode around the country. The other states are in our prayers. We wish nothing but a speedy resolution. But it's a reminder that we're all in the same boat together.
So I don't want to borrow from Peter to pay Paul, as they say, but is there any possibility of increased tax revenues coming to New Jersey? Because you have a lot of people, including someone working at Bloomberg, I have to tell you, who are doing their work from New Jersey, where otherwise they'd be in Manhattan.
Yes, the answer I assume is yes, but in so many respects, as New York goes, New York City in particular goes, a big bulk of New Jersey goes. So I don't wish any ill will whatsoever across the Hudson to our friends, but there is no question there's been a big work from home trend. The real estate market in the commuting suburbs has gotten very hot in the midst of this crisis. Again, we are overwhelmingly all in this together, and we've done an enormous amount with New York, in particular, Governor Cuomo, Mayor de Blasio, and our neighbors in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Delaware. We are in so many respects, we're the densest region in America. We're all in this together.
We're speaking with Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey on Bloomberg Television and Radio. You mentioned the real estate market a moment ago. Give us a sense of both the commercial and the residential. You said it's hot. Are you seeing prices go up, commercial, residential?
Without question, residential, particularly in the commuting, the communities that are easily commutable into New York. Commercial, I think it's too early to tell. I do believe that there is going to be a revisiting of some of what we had heretofore thought over the past couple of years of the stranded assets, the suburban mall, the low slung sort of spaceship 3-story corporate headquarters, which our state was known for so long. There was a period of time here where folks looked at those assets and said, listen, the world has moved to a different place, a different paradigm. I believe strongly, not only will those assets be now looked at again with perhaps a different set of eyes, but they are being looked at, to be determined.
Finally, Governor Murphy, let's turn to politics, but everything is affected by the pandemic. You've just had a primary in New Jersey. The reports were an awful lot of mail-in ballots were used, and it's delayed a lot of the results. There have even been some challenges already. Looking forward to November, what does that tell us about what the elections are going to look like in this age of the pandemic?
A good question. Too early to tell, David, on November, but we tried in this primary. First of all, we moved our primary from June 2nd to this week, July 7th, and we went to a hybrid model. Everyone, if you were registered as a Democrat or Republican, you were mailed a ballot. Self-addressed stamp envelope, you just return the ballot. If you were not registered, you got an application for a ballot. And at the same time, we asked each of our 21 counties to have 50% capacity for in-person voting on election day, and every municipality to have at least one location. It's too early to tell for sure, but we think it worked out quite well. We're trying to balance the sacred right in democracy to vote and to have every vote counted, and at the same time, the realities of public health today. So too early to tell on what November looks like, but we think based on all the evidence we have so far that the primary worked out quite well.
But do you have to take special precautions on the voter fraud claims? Because there are a lot of claims coming in about voter fraud. Generally, people think there isn't that much of it. But will you have to ramp up and actually invest more to making sure you protect the system in November?
Oh, listen, we did it in this primary. In fact, in their plain clothes, we had National Guard members up and down the state. I'm fearful, and by the way, we take every one of these claims seriously, and we run them to ground. We've had an enormous amount of back and forth with the U.S. Postal Service, not on fraud, but on delivery and timing of delivery. I'm fearful that the fraud point is a political talking point more than it is a reality. So I'll just say that, but we take every one of these instances deadly seriously.
And finally, really to wrap up, I always like to ask you, how are you holding up, Governor? Because you've had your own health concerns. Are you holding up all right?
I am, David. You're great to always ask. I had surgery, fairly significant surgery, on, as luck would have it, the day of our first positive case on March 4th. I had a nice plan to ease my way back in. That plan was thrown out the window a few days later, but so far, I'm knocking on wood, so far so good, and thank you for asking.